So coming up this weekend is going to be the first round of the lightweights and middleweights in the PFL's 8-man single elimination 2025 tournament. And last week, of course, we did have the women's flyweights and the men's bantamweights, and over 50% of that card was on very short notice, and of course, it burned me. I did not pick very well on that card. Thankfully, the two fights that I bet pretty heavily on personally was Liz Carmouche inside the distance, and then Elora Dana, who ended up closing as the underdog. But the picks were terrible on that one, and honestly, I do just kind of mostly put it down to just the short notice nature of all of those fights, and even two of the fights changed the night before the card with cancellations. So everyone's got excuses. So we can all we can do is move on and really try and nail this card and obviously the future PFL cards as well. I did have an article out for this card about 48 hours ago. I believe I uploaded it to the We Want Picks website. And since then, one fight has already changed and one fight has already been cancelled. Hopefully, we don't have a repeat of last week where all of the fights just get cancelled and then we've got a completely different card. But we'll see how it goes. Of course, if you did want to sign up and read my articles for PFL and for LFA and Cage Warriors this weekend, wewantpicks.com. The premium membership is $10 per month, but you can get it 10% off your first month or your first membership in general if you do sign up using my code ARTEM. And also you get access to Angelo and Jacob's bets and Bet Sam's premium bets and you name it, it's all on there. We've got a 9-fight card, let's get into it. Robert Watley versus Tony Caruso is going to be starting off the night. If you want to watch more tape on Tony Caruso, search up Antonio Caruso, because for a long time I couldn't find anything on him, and then I realized that he does fight under the name Antonio. Anyways, this is a wrestler versus striker matchup. Antonio Caruso is a high volume striker that likes to fight from range. Robert Watley is a wrestler. This is a guy that has had a somewhat successful MMA career. He did fight in the PFL in 2018, didn't have the best career there, but then took a very long period of time away, and then has recently been beating quite a few up-and-coming prospects. And Marquez Forrest, undefeated as an amateur, undefeated as a professional, and Marquez Forrest ultimately was able to lose to Robert Watley because Watley's cardio was very, very good in that third round, and he really was able to push a pretty solid pace in that matchup. So it just comes down to, in my opinion, can Robert Watley get the takedowns? Because Watley's striking is okay. It really is just forward pressure boxing, and it's not incredible. And Antonio Caruso's striking, in my opinion, is pretty solid. However, we have seen a fight where Antonio Caruso had to fight a PFL level wrestler when he did, of course, take on Anthony Romero. And Romero, in the first round of that fight, was just getting takedowns at will. I know that fight was 2 years ago, of course, but from watching that fight, I do believe that Robert Watley can get the takedowns. Caruso was getting taken down over and over and over again in that fight, and then towards the end of the fight, for some reason, Romero just stopped shooting for takedowns, but ultimately, styles make fights. I think the wrestler Watley can get the takedowns, and I think he can win the fight by decision. I think he is a slight favourite in the odds, but I don't think odds are out for everyone yet. Aaron Jeffery fights against Murad Ramazanov. This is where things get interesting. Of course, now if you've read the article, you will know I'm actually picking the underdog in Aaron Jeffery in this fight. It comes down to just one real main thing for me with Murad Ramazanov. If he can't get the takedowns, he has nothing. He lost a decision to Shamil Musayev last year after getting knocked out to him. 15 minutes went by, and Murad Ramazanov threw 14 strikes in that fight. 14 strikes. So if he doesn't get the takedown, he's not going to do anything. He's just going to stand there and he's just going to walk forward. And Aaron Jeffery isn't the best striker in the world. I don't think that even he would admit that, but he is a pretty high volume guy. He is a guy that can put the pressure on, and he is a guy that does like to box up a bit. Jeffery's striking defense isn't amazing, but if Murad Ramazanov isn't going to be throwing anything, it's not going to matter. What matters, though, in this fight is how good is Aaron Jeffery's takedown defense, because we have seen it look good, but we've also seen it look bad in the past. Of course, he did lose to John Salter in 2023 in what was a pretty interesting matchup for him. He was very heavily favored to win this fight, and Salter was able to pressure forward and get the takedowns on Aaron Jeffery, and Jeffery ultimately did crumble to the pressure of John Salter, and that wasn't really a great loss to have because Salter is pretty old, but He did manage to make a big comeback win against another similar stylistic matchup to Dalton Rosta, who was a very, very aggressive, constantly shooting for takedowns American wrestler. And in that fight, he was able to defend the takedowns. The sprawls looked amazing. The takedown defense looked fantastic. And ultimately, he was able to win that fight in a way that I think he could potentially beat Murad Ramazanov. If you're picking Murad Ramazanov, you are picking him to get the takedowns and just dominate the fight from there. Because in truth, once he does get the takedown, he is dominant. He does search for submissions. He does have fantastic ground and pound. But he's moving up a weight class now. That size advantage that he did once hold isn't going to hold anymore at the 185-pound division. He's a welterweight coming up. And he wasn't the biggest welterweight either. So I think that we're going to see Aaron Jeffery have a bit of a size advantage here. And if he can defend the takedowns, and I will admit there is a big if there, I think he is going to look very good in this matchup. He's going to throw a lot more than 17 strikes over 15 minutes. That's for sure. So I'm picking Jeffery. I think he's a plus 150 underdog right now, plus 165. So, yeah, maybe getting a little bit wider there, but Jeffery is my pick. Now we have Brent Primus taking on Vincius Cenci, and, short notice fight, if you haven't guessed already. Vincius Cenci, of course, was on the Contender Series in 2022. He came out of absolute nowhere. I will admit, during this time period, I was like super obsessed with following prospects and seeing who was going to be on the Contender Series, and I had never seen Cenci's name anywhere. So he came out of nowhere, and then he lost to Sam Patterson, and then he kind of just disappeared. He fought on the regional scene for promotions that have been flagged for record padding, so not really too good to see that there, I will admit, but against Sam Patterson, he actually looked pretty good, I will be honest. The striking wasn't incredible, but the grappling was very good. He, in the first round, put Sam Patterson in some pretty tough positions, had some submission attempts against Patterson, and then after that, he just gassed out. The cardio was not there, but the grappling was, and he does have very solid grappling. So, in my opinion, it just kind of comes down to this matchup. Can Brent Primus survive the first round against the grappler that's going to try and submit him? Because if he doesn't, then Cenci's probably going to gas out. Another interesting thing about this, though, is he actually has a decision win pretty recently in March, and for some reason, I could not find this fight anywhere. I live in New Zealand. Maybe I've been geo-blocked or something, so I can't watch it, but I have UFC Fight Pass. UAE Warriors 48 wasn't on Fight Pass, but UAE Warriors 47 and 49 were. I couldn't find it on YouTube, but I could find other fights from UAE Warriors 48, so I don't know. Do you guys have tape of that fight? Because I genuinely could not find it. So everything I know about Cenci is really from 2022 and earlier, and I can tell you he's a good grappler with pretty bad cardio, but that was, what, 2.5 years ago now? Maybe he's gotten a bit better, but Brent Primus made it all the way to the finals last year, admittedly had good stylistic matchups for him. He fought 3 strikers in a row, but ultimately, he's still a former Bellator champion. He is still a very good wrestler. He is 40 years old, but the performances that he had here weren't all that long ago, so I think that maybe we can see Brent Primus go out there, survive the first round against Cenci, and round 2 and 3 really put it on him to find a round 2 or 3 finish. Now we can move up to 185 again. We have Josh Silveira fighting against Mike Shipman. And this is an interesting fight to see Mike Shipman as such a big underdog, because I will admit, I think he's got a shot at the upset here, but I am still going to side with Josh Silveira. Mike Shipman's last 2 fights, I think, have set him up very well for a matchup against Silveira, who I do believe is going to look to take him down in this fight. Shipman fought the English wrestler in Stephen Hill. Stephen Hill was just shooting for single legs that whole fight. Shipman was able to defend them with relative ease, and then he was able to just smoke him on the feet, to be honest. And then he went against the wrestler Islam Abdul Basay, and all Abdul Basay wanted to do was clinch against Mike Shipman. So Shipman was able to avoid some of those clinch situations, turn some of those clinch situations into takedown attempts, and once he got on top, Basay had no idea what to do. And Shipman absolutely dominated with ground and pound and was able to get a KO win after that. In this matchup, though, Silveira is a very good athlete. At 205 pounds, he wasn't the biggest guy in the world, but throughout his entire career, he's been fighting at 185 or 205. Of course, 205 in the PFL, because 185 didn't exist in the PFL before this year. But I think that Silveira coming down to 185 is going to be a very good thing. I think that that's going to keep him at a pretty decent size advantage, really. He wasn't the biggest guy at 205, but I think at 185, that size is going to be a lot more, like, I guess, better, I guess would be the word. I think that he can mix in strikes. Silveira, I think, is going to have, like, more arsenal on the feet. I think he's got more kicks because he does have pretty good kicks. Shipman mostly does just box on the feet, even though it is pretty good, pretty powerful. And Silveira can mix in the takedowns. We have seen Shipman's takedown defense look fantastic in the last two fights, but in my opinion, they were a combination of different styles of wrestling, guys that can't set up their takedowns anywhere near as well as Josh Silveira, and then also guys that aren't as big and imposing as Josh Silveira. We've seen Josh Silveira out-wrestled in the past against Impa Kasanganay twice, but I think that in this matchup, we're going to see Silveira be able to mix it up, and I think that we see him go out there and get a win. He looked very good against Rob Wilkinson, and I think this is stylistically a pretty similar stylistic matchup there, but at 185. Now, Clay Collard fights against Alfie Davis. Very, very fun matchup here. We've got the boxer in Clay Collard, of course, a guy who has a professional boxing background, and in my opinion, maybe a little bit underrated. He was a journeyman, but he did fight some very talented guys in the world of boxing. I believe this Bektemir Malakuziev recently had a pretty big fight. That was on a Canelo card as well. And then a couple of these other guys that he lost to are still undefeated, and I believe one of them has got like some sort of world regional title. But aside from that, if you look at his MMA career, he came back into the PFL in 2021. He beat Anthony Pettis at 2021. That was impressive. Beat our favorite UFC fighter, Dalton Rotterback. And then lost to Manfio in a decision I strongly disagree with. And then he lost to Alex Martinez in a decision I will say this is probably the worst robbery in PFL history. This decision that went Alex Martinez's way. And looking at the 2022 season, if Clay Collard won that decision, I believe that he would have become the world champion that year, and he would have won the $1 million. He had a chance against OAM, but OAM's just a boring wrestler and was able to do that to him. And since then, he's been on a little bit of a slide, but against very good competition. Alfie Davis is a very good kickboxer. This guy is a multiple-time national kickboxing champion. He fights just like Wonderboy Thompson, bouncing around on his feet, very light on his feet, trying to throw kicks, and that is mostly what he throws. It's kicks to the body, kicks to the legs, kicks to the head. He's called the X-Man. He'll throw an X kick as well every now and then. He's very fun to watch, but he can get pressured backwards, and he can also get hit as well. We saw in his not his most recent fight against Mansar Banawi, I'll get there in a second, but against Oscar Owensworth, who is nowhere near the boxer that Clay Collard is. When Alfie Davis was backing up and throwing his counter hooks, he had his chin way up in the air, and Collard is a good enough boxer to be able to exploit that. Mansar Banawi was able to hurt him as well with strikes in the clinch. Collard's pretty good in the clinch. He can close the distance and do that. And Banawi's a good grappler though. And that's the thing about Alfie Davis, is when he wilts to pressure, it's usually when he needs to worry about a takedown coming his way. Clay Collard isn't a wrestler. It's not really his game to mix in wrestling, but I think stylistically, if you look at this fight, we've seen Alfie Davis really struggled with wrestlers in the past. I think that Clay Collard would be very smart to at least attempt takedowns, or at least make Alfie Davis think that a takedown could potentially be coming, because it would open a lot of opportunities for himself on the feet with the boxing that he does possess. It's a very tough fight to pick, because Clay Collard, I will sadly admit, I do think now he is probably definitely in the second half of his career. His prime's probably past him now. He's taken a lot of damage in the past, against Patricky Pitbull. This was an absolute war, Both guys took a lot of damage in that fight. But I think that Clay Collard in this one, if he pushes forward, he throws his hooks, uses his boxing combinations that he's so good at, I think he can make Alfie Davis back up, and I think he can find success. However, I will admit, I think the odds are getting a bit wide for this one here. Clay Collard minus 180 is where the odds are right now. I personally can't say I fully agree with that sort of line movement there. I think that the fight is a bit closer than that. It's a very close matchup. This is not a high confidence pick at all, but I think that Collard is the pick to win by decision. I think he's going to pressure Alfie Davis, and when he does, and if he even attempts takedowns, it's going to make the fight so much easier for Collard to get his boxing combinations up and running. We move up to the main card. Mads Burnell taking on JJ Wilson. We haven't seen JJ Wilson fight for over 18 months now, but boy oh boy did he look good in that fight against Mansour Barnawi. Mansour Barnawi, a very, very talented grappler, and JJ Wilson won that fight by out-grappling Mansour Barnawi. There's not really another way to put it. He was able to put Mansour Barnawi in some tough positions, was able to escape some tough positions in that fight, and just won the fight by being able to overpower Barnawi's grappling, and that is super, super impressive to watch, because now he's taking on Mads Burnell. Mads Burnell is a former European no-gi BJJ champion, maybe a silver medalist. I think he's a champion though, but you can tell that he's a very good grappler when you watch his fights. But the way that he fights is, it's a very, very sort of chain wrestling heavy style. He wants to shoot for takedowns, and he shoots for takedowns over and over and over again. Sometimes he sets them up, sometimes he doesn't, but he's got pretty good accuracy considering the high volume of takedowns that he will attempt in a fight. He is a former featherweight, just like JJ Wilson. However, I think that JJ Wilson is still going to have a pretty big size advantage in this fight. And the thing is, Burnell, he moved up to 155 about a year ago, fought against Dufour, and these fights have been at 155. JJ Wilson's been at 155, I think, just since the Barnawi fight, because he did miss weight quite a few times in his career. I think it was actually since then he's been at 155, but nonetheless, I think that JJ Wilson is going to have the size advantage in this matchup. And I think that also in the striking, I think he's got more options on the feet. I think that JJ Wilson has kicks, and Mads Burnell just kind of boxes. He does have pretty effective striking. I've seen him get knockdowns very recently, but I think it's just kind of been the range. The size advantage is going to be apparent. Both guys are former featherweights, but JJ Wilson's going to be a lot bigger. It's also worth noting too that Wilson has won a fight off his back before. Vladimir Tokov was controlling him for very long periods of time in that matchup, and JJ Wilson was just able to throw elbows and throw up submission attempts, and that's what ultimately was able to get him the win in that fight. So I like JJ Wilson in this one. He is getting a bit wider. I think money is coming in on him. He's minus 175 right now in this fight against Mads Burnell. Now Dalton Rosta fights against Sadibou, and he's the underdog, and I'm picking him as the underdog here. This is another wrestler versus striker matchup. Sadibou, of course, is a former PFL $1 million championship winner, but at 170 pounds. And then he moved up to 205 pounds in the 2024 season after losing the 2023 season there. And he looked okay. I mean, Andrew Sanchez has no chin whatsoever, but Josh Silveira took him down, and then he broke his thumb on a takedown attempt. Pretty ugly knockout loss there. Sadibou now is 38 years old, and the takedown defense is good, but the size advantage that he once possessed isn't going to be there anymore. 6'3" with an 80-inch reach is still very tall and very long for 185, but those dimensions, that size, is more common at 185 than it is at 170. Dalton Rosta, he did lose to Aaron Jeffery. I talked about the matchup before, but he just got a big comeback win against Norbert Naveni Jr., and the way that he beat Norbert Naveni Jr. was quite amazing, honestly. He was able to just take down Norbert Naveni Jr. and out-wrestle him for 2 rounds. He completely gassed out in round number 3, but it didn't matter because he had already banked the first 2 rounds by just really dominating Naveni Jr. in the wrestling department, getting takedowns, getting ground and pound away. And if he's going to come out here against Sadibou, Sai has very good takedown defense against guys at 170 pounds. Rosta should be able to come out here and just shoot for takedowns over and over again and get most of them, or at least get some of them, at least get enough of them to get Sadibou down to the ground, when then Rosta can start working his ground and pound, because Rosta's not the biggest guy at 185. He might even be the smaller guy in this matchup, even taking on a guy at 170, but he's very strong, he's very well built, and I think he's just going to keep coming forward, and he's just going to be really, really annoying for the striker Sadibou to deal with. So I'm going to pick Dalton Rosta to win by decision by really implementing that wrestling in the first 2 rounds. Gadzhi Rabadanov versus Marc Diakiese. Honestly, Gadzhi Rabadanov just won the championship at 155. I think he might be able to repeat again, especially if he wins this matchup. I think his next fight is JJ Wilson, and he's already beaten JJ Wilson anyway. Rabadanov's good everywhere. He's a good striker. He's a good wrestler. He's honestly pretty awesome to watch on the feet. He's quite powerful. He is listed at 5'8", but he's not even that small for lightweight, honestly. And we just saw him go through some pretty good guys to get here. He knocked out Michael Defort, and then he knocked out the former Bellator champion, of course, Brent Primus, in the championship matchup in the third round. And before that, you know, he's been defending takedowns, getting takedowns, and it's sort of winning. Like, he out-wrestled Koji Takeda, which is a pretty impressive out-wrestling sort of victory, because Takeda's a good wrestler. But Marc Diakiese, we know what Marc Diakiese brings to the table. He was a Muay Thai striker in the UFC, and then he become D1 Diakiese, and honestly just become the most boring fighter in the promotion for a bit. And then I think the UFC were just like, we're tired of this, man. Like, you're just so boring to watch. No one wants to watch D1 Diakiese anymore. He used to be exciting. He's not anymore. Come to Bellator, beat Tim Wild, and now here he is in the PFL tournament. Diakiese is a good fighter. That's the thing. But we saw him get completely shut down by Michael Johnson, and where Michael Johnson defended the takedowns and then just pressured Diakiese and boxed him up on the feet. Gadzhi Rabadanov, that's kind of his entire game. That's what he does. If he doesn't get takedowns, he's boxing up and close. He's throwing hooks up and close. And he can kick from range pretty well too, even though he is like only 5'8", of course, at 155. He's just a good, well-rounded fighter. This guy's the champion. I don't know why they brought him back, because to be honest with you, I think he's the only guy that won the championship last year that hasn't been benched for another season. So maybe they've got him on like a cheap contract. I don't know, because you guys know what it is with the PFL. The rumor mill is always swirling. But Rabadanov, they must just really like him. And I think, honestly, he probably should be able to repeat the season at 155. Considering like some of the better guys, he's either already beaten, like he's already beaten Brent Primus. He's a bad stylistic matchup for these two guys, and then he's already beaten JJ Wilson. So yeah, I think Rabadanov is probably just gonna win the whole tournament. Let's be honest. And speaking of winning the whole tournament, the winner of this fight, I think, is actually going to have a very good shot at winning the whole tournament as well. We're at 185 pounds for this main event between Impa Kasanganay taking on Fabian Edwards. And yes, Fabian Edwards is the brother of Leon Edwards. They do fight in a very similar stylistic way. Edwards is also a very technical striker, especially technical at 185, because 185 is like a dead zone of MMA, I guess, where there just isn't really that many guys that have the same sort of skill set that Fabian Edwards does possess. And that's the thing. Because he's similar to Leon Edwards, he loses in the same way. He loses to wrestlers, he loses to grapplers, he loses to guys that can pressure him and really force him backwards. And Impa Kasanganay is not an idiot. Impa Kasanganay does have good fight IQ. This guy come from 170 pounds to 205 pounds and then won the championship against Josh Silveira in 2023. Albeit, let's be honest, not against guys that I would say are as good as Fabian Edwards. And I think if you even look through the entire sort of run that he's had at 205 pounds, these light heavyweights that he's been beating and losing to aren't really as skilled as Fabian Edwards is. But we have a 185 pound showcase belt that I think is somewhat relevant here when he went out there against Johnny Eblin and gave Johnny Eblin a very tough fight. And Eblin is the guy that's beaten Edwards twice. And he's beaten Edwards twice somewhat soundly with the wrestling, with the control, with the dominance pressure. And then he lost to Dovlet Nurmagomedov in a minute. He lost that fight because he was actually landing some good shots on Dovlet Nurmagomedov, but then he got greedy. He tried to get the KO. He tried to chase him. He tried to land the hooks. And unfortunately for Impa Kasanganay, a bit of a lapse in judgment potentially, because that is Dovlet-san Nurmagomedov's game. Dovlet-san Nurmagomedov is a 5'10" light heavyweight boxer. And Kasanganay just walked straight into his trap, man, because that's what Dovlet-san Nurmagomedov is good at. He's good at throwing in punches in close, and Kasanganay got slept. He paid the price for getting a little bit too overzealous. But I think in this matchup against Edwards, we know that Impa Kasanganay can pressure fighters. He can close the distance. He can pressure with boxing as well. And importantly, and I think most importantly, he can get takedowns. He's a very talented grappler. He's a pretty solid wrestler. We saw him out-wrestle Josh Silveira twice. If he can out-wrestle Josh Silveira, he should be able to out-wrestle Fabian Edwards. And if that's not enough, he had a pretty competitive matchup against Eblin where he held his own in the wrestling as well. I'd like Kasanganay to win this matchup. Odds are closing though. He's minus 133 right now on bets online. Like the live odds, I guess, that I'm looking at right now, minus 130 for Kasanganay. Odds closing And it looks like money's coming on Edwards. I think that's somewhat understandable, I will be honest, because he does have a good skill set, but I think that Kasanganay is the guy that can implement a good game plan to shut down Edwards, because we know what Edwards' weakness is. It is getting pressured, it is backing up, it is getting taken down. I think Kasanganay can do that to Edwards. So I'm picking Kasanganay to win by decision against Fabian Edwards there, by pressuring, by getting the takedowns. And that's my breakdown for this card. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next one.